Good morning, friends, or afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. So I've got some feedback from yesterday towards the end with questions. I started answering, or yesterday, last weekend, I should say, started answering questions. People had questions about how monks and lay people should interact and things like that. And a couple of weeks ago, one of the members asked me to give a talk on monastic vinaya and for lay people. And so I've thought about actually combining all of this into one talk, because it doesn't necessarily need to be three separate talks, right? We can put it all together. And what it comes down to actually is what the Buddha called the Fourfold Assembly. And so the topic of this talk is the Fourfold Assembly, monastics and lay people working together in the Dhamma, right? Because the Fourfold Assembly is an extremely integral and important part of the Buddha's teaching and keeping that teaching alive. Right? And I'm going to actually, in a minute, I'm going to read you directly from the sutta, because you have to, sometimes summarizing it is not enough. You have to hear directly the words from the suttas to really have it be impactful. But the Buddha was very, very clear that the way that this Dhamma survives, the way that this, what he brought into the world, what he calls the, modern day we call it Buddhism, but that's a modern invention, that term, right? If you read in the suttas, what the Buddha called his, whatever you would call it, religion, philosophy, way of life, etc., what he called his teachings was the Dhamma and Vinaya. So the teaching and the discipline. So he will say, in this Dhamma and Vinaya, right? So this is the Buddha's sasana, the Buddha's Dhamma and Vinaya, right? And the way that this Dhamma and Vinaya exists and continues to exist is through what the Buddha called the Fourfold Assembly. The Fourfold Assembly, come on in, girls. Okay. The Fourfold Assembly is what? Men and women monastics, men and women lay people. So all kinds of human beings. Monastics and lay people, men and women. Right? That's the Fourfold Assembly. And when the Buddha became awakened, Mara came to him. And, Mara knew the danger of a fully awakened Buddha in the world, that he would teach the Dhamma, and many people would be, would free themselves from Mara's clutches. So when Buddha became awakened, Mara said, wonderful, good job, Buddha, very good. You've become awakened. Now pass on. Go away. Leave this world. And the Buddha says, no, I will not leave this world until I have a fourfold assembly that is skilled, learned, knowledgeable, practice well. Right? I will not leave this world until such time. And so 40 years later, in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which is where I'm going to read from here. Where is it? Which one is it? Okay. So again, 40 years later, Mara has been dejected for many years because so many of the Buddhist disciples have seen Mara and dismissed him. And now it is coming time for the Buddha to pass on. And so Mara comes to the Buddha again. And Mara says, and now, Lord, the Blessed Lord has such monks and disciples. May the Blessed One now attain final Nibbana. May the welfarer now attain final Nibbana. So basically Mara is saying, now go away. Go away. And so this is the direct wording here. Let me see. Okay, so because, and he says, now it's time for you to go away, Buddha, because you told me this 40 years ago. You said this. Evil one, I will not take vital nibbana till I have monks. And so this, it starts out with monks, then it goes to, so bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, laymen, laywomen. So the one paragraph applies to all four groups. Till I have bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, laymen, and laywomen who are accomplished, trained, skilled, learned, knowers of the Dhamma, trained in conformity with the Dhamma, correctly trained in walking in the path of the Dhamma, who will pass on what they have gained from their teacher, teach it, declare it, establish it, expound it, and analyze it, make it clear, till they shall be able by means of the Dhamma to refute false teachings that have arisen and teach the Dhamma of wondrous effect. Think about, this is important, right? This is, traditionally, it has kind of come down that the monks are supposed to be the scholars and the studious, and they're supposed to study this, and then the lay people just do merit and generosity. But the Buddha is actually saying, this is the Buddha saying that the Fourfold Assembly needs both monks and lay people who are disciplined, accomplished, trained, skilled, knowers of the Dhamma, trained in the Dhamma, right? So this is very important, right? This is a very important thing that we, as Buddhist people, right, as people who want to see that this the Buddha Gautama's teaching continues to last for a long time, right? There are some people who say already, we're in the Dhamma ending age, the Buddha's dispensation will be forgotten soon, all these things. The Dhamma is so corrupted right now that nobody can become awakened, right? And I don't know if I believe in that. My preceptor, Bhante Gunaratana, he didn't believe in that either. Many accomplished, like Ajahn Chah, from the Thai tradition, Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Mun, they didn't believe in these things either, right? They practiced. They said, we're going to practice as the Buddha taught us, right? And so, even if we are, of course, we're 2,500 years away, and from when the Buddha arose, for the average person, that seems like a lot of time, 2,600 years. Wow, that's a lot. But then you go through things like, did you know that Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, is actually closer to us in time than when the pyramids were built? And you say, whoa, right? Because we think that long ago was so long ago. But actually, in terms of the Dhamma, it's not. Right? It's only a blink of an eye that the Buddha was here in this world with us, proclaiming the Dhamma. Right? And since that time, 2,600 years ago, men and women, monastics and lay people have kept this Dhamma alive, have kept this Buddha Sasana alive. Right? So that today here, from our Buddhist countries, and now also in the West, somebody like me even, right, who was born in the West, can hear the Dhamma, can listen to the Dhamma, can go forth in the Dhamma. Right? This is a wonderful thing that our ancestors have done. Right? When I think of, I'm not Indian, I'm not Asian, but when I think about my ancestors, I think about also my monastic ancestors, right? So my bhikkhus and bhikkhunis are my ancestors who go back to the time of the Buddha, right? And how they kept this Dhamma alive, and how men and women lay people from so many countries, from so many places in the world, have kept this Dhamma alive and grown it, right? So it's very, very important that those of us who would like to see this Dhamma to grow into the future will do what, right? Not just post a link on social media, become a Buddhist, right? But to practice the Dhamma, to learn the Dhamma, to understand the Dhamma, right? See, this is the thing. If you read the ancient texts, you will see, like there's Mahavacchagota Sutta, which is, Vacchagota is a Brahmin who comes to the Buddha, and he asks them, he says, are there lay people who have attained such and such awakening, right? Like Sotipanna, stream entry, once returner, non-returner, etc. And the Buddha says, yes. There are not only 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, but more lay women who have attained stream entry, lay men who have attained stream entry, monastics who have attained stream entry, lay men, lay women, monastics who have attained non-returner, right? And Vacchagota is like, wow, right? And that, like that amazement, that just that there are so many well-skilled, well-developed people in this Dhamma and discipline was enough to convince this Brahmin to say, consider me a layperson under the Buddha for life, right? So that, in and of itself, is a very encouraging thing, right? You know, in the West, one of the things that's, somebody might read that, oh, the Fourfold Assembly is very good, but then they look around and they say, well, where are all the women monastics? Where are the bhikkhunis, right? And so they feel disheartened. They say, well, the Buddha says about all these Fourfold Assembly, but where are they? Right? Or, the lay people, oh, but the lay people, they're not really, how come they're not practicing like the Buddha says we should all practice, right? And so that kind of is disheartening. It's a little discouraging. They say, but this is why it's so important for all of us to understand this is how we should practice. Right? This is how the Buddha encourages us. The Buddha says, practice this way. Right? Even in the suttas, you can you think that, oh, it's just supposed to be the monks are up here and the lay people here and the monks teach the Dhamma. No. Do you know about householder chitta? Householder chitta, you can see this in the early text. You can see householder chitta was a layman who taught monks. He taught lay people, but he taught everybody. But some monks even went to him to hear and to understand the Dhamma. All right, so this is very important. This is very, in my opinion, encouraging and enlightening to understand that the lay people have a stake in this too, right? To understand the Dhamma, to learn the Dhamma, right? To know the Dhamma. And I know it's a hard time. One of the things that have stopped that from happening in many Buddhist countries is that there hasn't been lots of good translations of like the suttas in people's countries. Even in Sri Lanka, I remember a young guy came to me, a Sri Lankan gentleman, when I was at Bhavana, and he said, Bhante, he says, I wasn't able to read the suttas until I read them in English. And I realized how grateful I was, right, that I was able to understand these suttas, even though a person who was born in a Buddhist country wasn't able to, because of the way it was set up that they wouldn't allow the Dhamma to be translated into the normal speak. Right? I felt like sad about that. I was like, oh, okay, so this person, but now he's here and he's able to learn and he's able to understand and he took charge of his practice, right? That's the most important thing. That and you see these Fourfold Assembly, these laymen and laywomen and men and women monastics, they were like equal partners of a whole, right? The Fourfold Assembly. This Fourfold Assembly is what keeps the Dhamma alive. It's what allows us to keep it alive and to spread it so that people who, one of the phrases in the suttas is, without having heard the Dhamma, they would be lost, right? So there's lots of people who have little dust in their eye, right? Who would be very impacted and would love the Dhamma, but they have no contact with it, right? Like I was one of those, right? But I was able to, thanks to people who came from Buddhist countries and who started places here and stuff like that, I was able to make contact with that later in my life, right? That was so wonderful, so blessed. And so for me, this is one of my most important things, I have my own awakening, which is the most important thing, because you can't help others if you can help yourself. But then on the other hand, I have the other side of my Dhammadutta. Right? Dhammadutta means like a Dhamma mission. Right? My Dhamma mission is to help grow the Dhamma in this country that I was born in. Right? So it's very good, very important that we make sure that both monastics and lay people are well trained, right? Well versed in the Dhamma. Understand this Dhamma. Okay? And to do that, we have to be able to work together. Right? And we also have to be able to understand things from each other's perspectives. Okay? There are duties that a layperson has to a monastic and that a monastic has to a layperson. Right? Our main shared duty together is that we keep the system, we keep the Buddha Sasana going. Right? That's a shared duty. What's another shared duty? Another shared duty is that we do our best to make sure that those who are teaching in the system and those who are, what would you have authority in the system are wise and skillful and understand this Dhamma well. The other thing that should be understood is, and this is an interesting thing for me, because I believe that actually lay people should understand the Vinaya. Now, obviously, you can't understand the extent of the monastic Vinaya like monastics. And to be honest with you, in my experience, most monastics don't really fully understand the Vinaya either. Right? And I'm not coming at that as I know the Vinaya, like kind of arrogance. Actually, as a Westerner, it was something that I was surprised about. Right? I mean, I knew a little bit about that reading like Ajahn Chah, and you see Ajahn Chah's stories of him going to places and monks don't really know the Vinaya and things like that. So I kind of knew that existed, but then once I became a monk and I realized, whoa, right? And so really understanding the Vinaya is actually something that's very important for monastics. Because why? Because as a monastic, we have to live with these rules. That's my understanding. This is why I'm such a I'm not going to call myself a scholar of the Vinaya, but it is something that I really enjoy to read. I've read through it many times. I continue to do to really understand my knowledge. Why? Because this informs how I can understand, how I can live with these rules in society. Right? Because it's not easy, especially in a society that is not, like if I was in Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, in Indonesia, a place where around in a Buddhist community, actually that support actually makes it much easier for a monastic to follow the rules. Right? In the West, it gets a lot tougher because oftentimes the support's not there. Right? And so being able to understand the monastic rules is very important. And what some monastics will tell me, that the reason why they don't think that's good is because lay people will not fully understand the full context of the rules, and they'll be they'll cast a lot of blame on the monks and be very nitpicky on the monks and always be looking, oh, they're doing this wrong, right? And that is a valid, I agree, that's a valid understanding. But I think last week, if you were here last week, you heard me talking about how we have to understand that monks are people, right? That monks are not awakened beings, right? So that it helps you to develop compassion and empathy, and that not to have a fault-finding mind, right? When the Buddha, in the Vinaya, when the Buddha talks about if you are to go and admonish another monastic, there's a couple things you need to do. Like you have to do it with a mind of metta, not with a fault-finding mind, not like you're trying to pick at everybody's faults and things like that, right? So I encourage you to, and it's available in English. Like I found years before I was a monastic, I found the monastic rules on PDF online. I was like, oh wow, this is cool. I actually get to read the monastic rules. Like, this is maybe going back 10 years ago, right about the time that I was starting to think about becoming a monastic. And I started to understand, like, oh, okay. And that now, as I've gone through, I understand now that there is what is in the Vinaya, and there is also what is part of culture, right? And there's also how the Vinaya is interpreted, right? One of the most important things to understand, I think, with lay people and monastics is when that monastic is dealing with people of the opposite sex, right? So this deals with monastics, bhikkhus and women, and bhikkhunis and men. The Buddha says that a skilled bhikkhu should understand both the bhikkhuni and the bhikkhu rules, right? So I should understand the rules for the women monastics as well. And so one of the most common ones is the rule about monks not being allowed to touch women. Okay? So if you look in the Vinaya, the rule is, so in the monastic rules, there is the rule itself, and then there's a story that explains why the rules came about. Because in the early days of when the Buddha first started his teaching, most of the monastics had either already become awakened or were very close. So they were naturally not doing all kinds of crazy bad stuff. Right? So when a monk did something and the society, the people didn't like it, and the monastics didn't like it, and the Buddhist lay people didn't like it, and they brought this to the Buddha, and the Buddha says, "Ah, this is not good. You foolish man," that's what the Buddha says. Or where the bhikkhuni says, "You foolish woman, you should not have done this. This is not for what? This is not for the increase in confidence and faith of those who already have confidence and faith." So for people who are Buddhist, right? And neither it is for the development of confidence and faith for people who are not Buddhist, right? So the people who are not Buddhist, but who might be kind of interested, and they kind of start looking in and they see this and they're like, "Oh, I don't like this. Like, I'm not going to go forward because I see this," right? So the Buddha, for the development and for the continued existence of the teachings, the Buddha considered the culture at the time. The way the story goes is, right, that a married couple comes to a monastic. Apparently, back in the day, the people, one of the favorite layperson things with monastics was to go and tour their little hut or their cave. Or it's like, "Ooh, let me see how this monastic lives," right? So this married couple comes in there, and the husband it's kind of like he's kind of dim-witted, he's kind of a little doofus, and he's like, "Wow, this is so wonderful." And meanwhile, behind him, the monk is like, putting his hands on the wife and rubbing her shoulder and things like that. And then when they leave, the husband's like, "Wow, these monks are so good." Right? And the wife says, "Well, that monk, touched me like a husband would touch me." And the husband got angry. And he said, "These monks are horrible. They're liars. They do shenanigans, etc." Right? And so then that came to the Buddha. And so this is where the rule came. The rule is that a monk whose mind is filled with lust should not touch a woman. Right? That's it. That's the rule. So we understand where this came from. So first of all, we understand that this rule is not made because women are bad, or women are evil, or women are dirty, or women are impure, or anything like that. It was made to protect the women from a bad monk, right? And we see a bunch of these rules that in the West, people will see this like, "Oh, that's misogynist. That's a rule against women." But actually, if you read the story, it's because monks are doing bad things, right? So the Buddha makes this rule. And so this rule has morphed into, right, that there should be no physical contact whatsoever between a bhikkhu and a woman layperson. Right? And there's a couple reasons for that. One of the reasons is that later developments, there came what's to be called the mind moment, right? And so the Abhidhamma and things like that. And you never see this mind moment thing in the early texts or the Vinaya. But later on, there's a mind moment. So like you divide 1 second into like 72 mind moments, right? And so you might be, a bhikkhuni might be dealing with a man, or a bhikkhu might be dealing with a woman, and they might not even recognize it, but 1/72 of a second, some lust arose, right? And so then they will argue that that is a breach of the rule, right? And so that is how, as far as I understand, I'm not a scholar. Like this is what in my own research of understanding and learning from senior monastics, as to why this has kind of come down this way, right? This is what I understand to be this development of this mind moment. And you know what? Is the kind of the modern version of, you shouldn't touch women at all, is that prudent? Possibly, yeah. Because this is why, if there could be many different senior monastics who might hear me speaking, and they will say, this monk is wrong, right? And then some will say, oh yeah, this monk is right? Because there's lots of different views, lots of different understandings, right? And so, as a layperson, and this is something that, when I talk to Westerners, it's important, because they'll talk to me, and they know that this is how I, roll things. But I tell them, I said, listen, if you go to a more traditional place, this is what they're going to expect. This is how you should. So, you don't just go in there like a Westerner saying, this is how it should be. No, you understand that different cultures, different people are going to interpret things differently, right? So you should understand that, right? And it's the same thing with Westerners. Like my preceptor, Bhante Gunaratana, when he came to America, he thought, he said, well, some things, this is a different culture. Some things need to change. Some things need to be updated, right? And so he started doing things like, if people would shake his hand, he would shake their hand, right? Now, for a person from, a Buddhist country, or from, the handshaking thing, as far as I can tell, this is a Westerner, an ignorant Westerner, just not, I'm not from that culture, so I don't understand. But as far as I can tell, and this is what I tell Westerners, is even regular people, from places, mostly it's, the handshaking thing is a Western thing. It wasn't something that, that you get this close and you hold hands and things like that, right? So it's not like a thing where oh, you can't touch me per se, but it's just part of the culture. It's a different way of people interacting. And so, so like Sri Lankan people, they weren't too keen on these kind of things, right? So they have, and there's a couple different senior Sri Lankan monastics that I know of who came to America and who have actually done a lot of good, helping a lot of, bringing the Dhamma to the West, right? Laymen and women who are dignitaries, government people, etc. And, in countries like Sri Lanka and Thailand, monks have kind of some high political office and they're kind of interconnected in the government that way. And so here's this very senior monastic in line as the Queen of England's going down. And Bhante Ji said, you can watch the video. This was 30 years ago, something like that. And the monk is going like this, should I, shake the hand of the queen or not, right? And so in the end, the monastic actually shook the queen's hand. And then Bhante Ji told me it was a scandal for a month in the newspapers that this monk shook the queen's hand and all these kinds of things, right? So this is how it is. This is how we understand, and this is how, for me as a monastic, wherever I go, if I go to Thai place, Burmese place, Sri Lankan place, Indonesian place, etc., what I want to do is to try to do things in the way that the people there are most understanding and comfortable with, right? I don't want to come in and say, this is how I do things, and yada, yada, yada. That's not really beneficial to the Dhamma, right? That's not really a very beneficial thing, right? But so, I'll give you, from my policies, like me knowing the Vinaya. So one of my policies is, if somebody wants to shake my hand, I'll do it, man or a woman. Now, I'm not going to go out and try to shake somebody's hand, right? Because as a monk, I shouldn't, stay dignified or whatever. But if somebody comes and shakes my hand, it's okay. I'll do it, right? Like, if a Westerner goes to just shake somebody's hand or whatever, and the monk's kind of like this, actually it's kind of hurtful to the person. Like, it feels like, they don't know, they don't understand, right? But they know in their culture that the person's kind of being like this. They're like, oh, what is this person? They don't want to, say hello to me. They don't want to, et cetera, right? I had to understand the Vinaya to understand it's okay that I can do this, right? I'm not being lustful and trying to, make contact because of that, right? I'm not making contact at all, right? The other person's coming to me, whatever, I'll accept it, okay, right? Another policy of mine that's much more controversial, and again, I'm only talking for myself, right? Many monks and many other people would say this is not good at all, and I can understand their view. But for me, one of the things that I do is I've had people who, just out of kind of like a gratitude feeling, emotion, just an overwhelming positive feeling, right? And I've had people just hug me, and I'm kind of like, okay, what am I supposed to do? I'm a monk, right? And so, again, and from the same reason, I says there's no actually, if somebody actually wants to hug me, there's no breach of a rule, right? I'm not going out and hugging somebody else, but if they want to hug, if they feel that way, it's okay. I'm not going to be like, oh, get away from me, right? Again, it's not a good thing in that regard. Now, I know that Buddhist people and Westerners who are very trained Buddhist people, they're not even going to do that at all, right? They're not going to come and hug me, right? But but even still, it's technically not against the rules, right? And you actually see this like in the Tibetan tradition. They're big huggers, like the Dalai Lama. Everybody's hugging. The Dalai Lama's hugging. And there's pictures of Dalai Lama hugging a famous bhikshuni and things like that. And some people don't like it, but this is how it is. So it is important for a layperson to understand these rules and understand how they're interpreted. Right? And so that could be whole classes in schools and things like that. So it's like, that's exhausting. So the most important thing is to understand, is to be whatever monastic you're with, like if you're taking care of them or whatever, you understand, like, okay, this is how monastics usually follow this rule, but I know this, how do you follow this rule? What do you do here? What do you do there? Etc. Right? So another one is monks not being able to be alone with a woman, right? This is another important one. Like when I came here, I was asked, how do I feel about just when people come to bring me my food, how do I feel about just one woman coming? And I said, well, if I don't get food for the day, I'm okay. I've survived. I've done multiple day fasts. I'm good. I don't need. But B, if that's the only thing that can happen, it's okay. Is it preferable? No, because it does technically break the rule. So there's two important factors to understand about being alone. And this is the same thing with men. If you have contact with a bhikkhuni, it's the same thing. Okay? There's two important factors, right? It is being invisible or blocked by the eye and blocked by the ear. So if you're in a place So for instance, like I'm here, right? I'm here by myself. I'm the only monastic here in this house right now. The only person who's resident here. And if one woman comes in and now I'm alone in the house with one woman, that's a breach, because it's in a place that is hidden from other people by the eye. Nobody can, I mean, you could technically, if you're in a window, maybe you could, see inside, but most people aren't. And it's by the ear. Somebody might be able to see, but they won't be able to hear. Right? So those are two important things. And so this is why a monastic, so for instance, like at Bhavana Society, which is a retreat center, a place that many Westerners come, people, all different kinds of people come to go on retreat. And we have an interview with a monastic. So if you want to come once during the retreat, or if you have questions, you can come with the monastic. And Bhante Ji has the library at Bhavana set up well, that's actually perfect for this thing, right? Because the door to the library is glass, so you can see in very clearly. And also, there's like a vent on top that you can hear what's coming in the library, right? So you can be in this room with a woman with the door closed, but not breaking the rule, because it's very clearly you can see in and very clearly you can hear, right? So these are the important factors. So like another one of my rules is people will ask, is it okay if a woman comes to pick you up, like in a car? Like one of the things that I do, like my family, I have two younger sisters as my siblings, and my family who lives in New Jersey. Like if I come to New Jersey, sometimes my sister will pick me up. And I thought about that, like, is that okay? Is that okay? One of the interesting things I found out recently, actually, was that senior Thai forest monastics even said to their juniors, like, if it's a family member, it's okay. I was surprised, because I thought they would be much more strict about these things. But, technically, you're in a car, has windows, right? As long as they're not tinted, somebody can see in. And if it's the summer and the window's down, somebody could hear too. So it's technically okay. It's not really. There's also a third factor. I forgot. The third factor is that the people are seeking to be hidden. Like you're trying to be alone with the other person. That's a third factor, right? It's important to understand that actually there are different ways to interpret different things. Like for instance, in the Thai tradition, they have what's called the Vinaya Mukha, which is a commentary of the Vinaya, right? And so many Buddhist monastics in Thailand, that is their Vinaya. That is what they go by, right? In Sri Lanka, there's no such thing, right? In the Vinaya, there's no such thing because it's just the Vinaya, right? So different monastics will interpret and do things differently. And so we should understand that as well. So like, if you, those of you who are in the West, right, you might say, oh, these Western Buddhist monastics, they're not following Vinaya, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. It might be the case. Like, for instance, in Thailand, they have for a woman to offer something to a monk, they have to do it with a cloth, right? No such thing in the Vinaya. And if you go to Sri Lanka, also no such thing, right? In Sri Lanka, there's no such thing as this cloth. But in Thailand, that's how it is. So if I was a person, I went to Thailand, and this is how it is, I'm not going to say to a laywoman, you don't need a cloth. That's stupid. No, if that's how, this is respecting the different cultures, respecting the different ways that people do this. And so this is important for us to understand, right? And the more we understand this, the more we can work together, right? There's less critical, judgmental, one of the things that is unfortunate, like I think the duties that monastics have to lay people is to encourage them more. Monks should, there's a wonderful thing in the Vinaya where when it comes to a senior monastic and a junior monastic, right? And it says that the junior monastic should look at the senior monastic as a father or a mother in case of bhikkhunis, and the senior monastic should look at the junior monastic as a son or a daughter, right? And that's a wonderful thing. So for me, I think that monastics and lay people should look on each other as like siblings, right? We want to encourage each other to do good in the Dhamma. We want to encourage each other. We don't want to look down on each other, right? We want to, because if you read, in my opinion, if you read the early texts in the Vinaya, actually what we see today is like the monks are like high up on this pedestal and the lay people are there. Actually, it was more like this. Like in the Vinaya, the monastics are a field of merit, right? So it's not totally like this. It's not totally equal, but it's closer, right? It's much a closer thing, because you have this interaction. You have Chitta the householder teaching monastics, and monastics going into town every day and talking with lay people, right? You have this interaction, and it's important, I think, for monastics to encourage that. Now, we can't get involved in a lot of things. We're not, coming and into the town and getting involved in the gossip and who's doing this and who's doing that. None of that. But we should be able to be more engaged with the lay people to encourage them to practice, right? To encourage them to develop their Noble Eightfold Path. And I think this is a very important thing, right? We should also, in my opinion, not think of, we should be very grateful, right? It's very easy for a monastic, especially, I've not experienced what I've experienced here ever. There's wonderful people coming, bringing me food every day. They're not, they're not much responsibility. I'm like, this is kind of nice. I like this. I've never experienced this before, because I was always lots of work, lots of activity, lots of this, right? Right? And lose their understanding, like these lay people, they're doing, this is hard times, but even still, they're coming in here, they're still doing this, they're still doing that. So it's very important for monastics to be more down to earth, right? To understand, to have much more gratitude for the lay people, right? And what they do, right? Because especially, again, as a Westerner, being around mostly Westerners and in a place that is a kind of, was like where I, became a monk, was a mix. There was lots of Westerners and there was lots of Sri Lankan and Thai and etc. So I got to see a little bit of it, but still, always lots of work and lots of activity, lots of fixing things and doing this and teaching that and yada yada, all this stuff. And so it's very easy to forget the gratitude, right? To kind of take lay people for granted, right? And lay people are here. Oh, good. I need you to do this. I need you to do that. I need you to do that. Like you almost like think of lay people as like servants, right? So this is also something that monastics should not do either, right? Monastics should really, really reflect on the gratitude that should arise for what the lay people do. So I think I've talked enough. We have about 20 minutes left. So if there's any questions, so if you have any clarifications on monastic rules, anything, any questions for me regarding the Fourfold Assembly, us working together, or anything like that, feel free to ask a question.